Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of DEI in 5. So, yesterday, I talked about some of the harmful effects of misrepresenting your identity as a DEI professional. More specifically, I talked about this person named Rachel, apologies, Raquel Evita Saraswati, who was born Rachel Elizabeth Seidel, who recently resigned from her role as Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Culture Officer from AFSC, which is the American Friends Service Committee, after she was called out for misrepresenting her race. Allegedly, for years, she had presented herself as, or has presented herself as a queer Muslim activist of Latina, South Asian, and Arab descent. But recently, her mother came forward in an interview to say that she is in fact white and is of British, German, and Italian descent. You can feel free to check out the video to learn more about that. But someone commented on that video, a viewer named Cinematic Rogue, and I want to just say again, I really appreciate when people comment on my videos and want to have like actual conversations versus just trolling me, because I'm posting this content for the sake of discourse. We need to have these conversations that some people may deem difficult, but they're necessary. And so again, I really hope more people come forward and just share their thoughts or reactions to what I'm sharing. I'll quickly read her comment and then, or their comment. I don't know their identity, apologies, but I'll quickly read their comment and then I will just share a few responses. This is probably going to be longer than 5 minutes today. Again, I should start calling it DEI in 10. All right. Cinematic Rogue says, thanks. Nice video. I'm endlessly fascinated by these transracial people. I'm also confused about the anger they get from people accusing them of quote unquote harm. From everything I've heard about Raquel Saraswati, she was very good at what she did. She worked hard, co-founded a number of organizations, and was very talented. I heard the same things about Rachel Dolezal, Jessica Krug, Carrie Barassa, and most of the other similar transracialists. It was like everything was fine until they were quote unquote exposed, and then all their work was rubbish and they were causing harm. They won awards, did tons of good, but those works were forgotten. I live in LA and grew up in the industry. It's a land of make-believe. If authenticity mattered, many of these people wouldn't work. I know a Muslim girl from Lebanon who wasn't getting work. She dyed her hair blonde, got a little quote unquote work done, changed her name, claims to be Christian, and now she's working. Many people who are successful here are not who they claim to be. Raquel Welch, RIP. If you don't know, Raquel Welch is a model and actress who recently passed away. So yes, RIP. But they said Rachel Welch, RIP, kept her Latin roots a secret, changed her name, dyed her hair blonde, and she died a celebrated artist. I'm confused about the quote unquote harm. Please make this make sense. Thanks for your time. So, I'll start by saying for the purpose of this discussion today, I'm mostly going to be focusing on North America because to get into the intricacies of colorism and the caste system and other ways of thinking and looking at racial social hierarchy on a global scale is better safe for another time. And I might actually do that. I might invite some subject matter experts to talk through it. But for the sake of today's discussion, keeping it North America centric, historically, white people have held an immense amount of power and privilege, right? While people belonging to marginalized groups have been subjected to oppression and discrimination. I talk about this all the time. It is history. I don't care about these folks that are like, oh, well, critical race. It is what it is. It's the history. It's how we got here. It is how the country was founded. I'll link even an article below to a white man from Harvard talking about it. It is what it is. So in order to escape this oppression and gain access to benefits and opportunities that come with being white, some people belonging to marginalized groups have attempted to pass as white, to be white passing, right? So Raquel Welch, who Cinematic Rogue mentioned, as well as their friend that they mentioned from Lebanon, who modified their appearance to get more work, that is something that people belonging to historically marginalized identities have done for ages because they lack the privilege and power that white people have. So, we can look back at the Jim Crow era where some light-skinned Black people would pass as white in order to avoid discrimination and segregation. They did so to get jobs, to do what they needed to do to thrive, to survive. A really good modern day example of this that I've seen, and I'm so mad, so upset that they canceled this show, but Lovecraft Country on Netflix, right? One of the characters, and I'm sorry if you haven't seen it and this is spoiling for you, it is what it is. You should go watch it. You should have been watched it because it's so good. But one of the characters, Ruby, a Black woman, she transforms into a white woman through the use of magic, but that's not the point. Magic aside, it really shows how some people some marginalized individuals feel as though they have to present themselves as white in order to escape oppression and gain access to power and privilege. And I'll never forget in the show when Ruby says, whiteness is the only currency that I need, or something along those lines, right? Now, do I agree with this or think it's right? No, I think there's a whole psychological struggle that you have to go through if you are pretending to be someone you're not in general, regardless of what your identity is. Obviously, if you're diagnosed with some true mental health disorders, like perhaps being a psychopath, it may not have that same sort of moral or ethical weight that it would have on the average person. But again, there is that piece. But I don't think it's right. I myself don't want to put on, but I have in the past, right? I spent years hiding my hair. When I worked in offices, I would wear straight wigs. I would get sew-ins. I would put my hair in braids. I never wore my hair out for the longest time. I grew up believing and being taught that my hair in its natural state, in its froze state, you can currently, my profile picture on YouTube is my hair in its natural state, which I have very tightly coiled 4C tiny curls of hair. That is my hair. And I didn't even know what my hair looked like until I got to college, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But growing up with this belief that my appearance is not right and being treated differently when my hair was in different styles showed me and proved that point, that there is currency to whiteness and how people treat you and how the world interacts with you. Not so much how you're interacting with the world, but how the world interacts with you. In contrast, when a white person misrepresents their race, it is so harmful for a number of reasons, right? And reasons that really impact others that have already been harmed. And I think that's the important piece here. If I pretend to be white, in general, I'm not going to be able to take, I'm saying me, but I can't pretend to be white. But I mean, I could, I guess, but that's not the point. But if I were to do that, or if a person of a marginalized identity were to do that, the harm there is not nearly as significant and impactful due to the lack of power and privilege that we carry. In contrast, when a white person is misrepresenting their race, it is harmful for so many reasons, right? And I can't get through all of them today, but I just want to highlight a couple. First and foremost, it's reinforcing, and I mentioned this in the last video, is reinforcing this idea of white privilege, right? You are flexing this privilege, the fact that you have the option, you have the choice to decide and to pretend to be someone else, right? For what reasons, I don't know. But should you choose, you could change back. A prime example of this is Miley Cyrus, who I struggle with so much, right? 2013, she dropped the album Bangers, which was like her first and only hip hop album. She herself pretty much labeled it as a dirty South hip hop work of art. And she milked the hell out of appropriating Black culture. I mean, from the way she dressed during that era to how she was speaking, to her dancing, everything. And that doesn't even include some of the comments she made, the egregious comments she's made about hip hop in general. And just, that's a whole, again, another video. But as soon as that no longer served her, she dropped it. And she went back to doing country and pop and rock and all that good jazz. And she shuffled back over to her previous self like it was nothing. And she no longer, I mean, she never had to experience the true lived experience of a marginalized individual. So that's one piece. It also disregards the many generations of trauma and oppression that folks belonging to historically marginalized racial identities have endured, which almost always gets passed down from generation to generation. And so these are experiences that someone who is born white and someone who has spent their childhood as white will never experience and will never be able to fully comprehend. I mean, think about it. Like, during your childhood, your formative years are when you're most malleable. There's plenty of psychology behind this, right? It's when we learn how we speak, right? I've lived in New York 15 years. I don't have an accent, an East Coast accent. My accent is kind of a melting pot of everything. It's like I grew up in the Midwest, but spent summers in the South. But then I have spent my adult years in New York. So, my formative years and the primary way that I speak is pretty much rooted in how I grew up in the childhood era. So similarly, if you encounter someone in the States that grew up in London and they have a British accent, right? They don't just magically, that doesn't just go away, right? Once they move here or live here for some time. But I say all that to say that, people like Raquel Saraswati and Rachel Dolezal did not have to endure those things. And there are photos of them as children on the interwebs, and they looked like little white girls. And, as I was like researching and learning more about Raquel Saraswati, I saw that childhood photo. I saw Rachel Dolezal as she was younger and blonde. And I look at it and I'm like, you were really just yourself. And then I look at my childhood photos. I don't have a single childhood photo of me with my natural hair out. I did not know what my natural hair looked like until I got to college and was able to kind of experiment. Because before then, I grew up in a household where it's like, you better have your hair done, which means you either getting straightened or braided, or it needs to be in a sew-in, or you need to put a wig on, or you need to do something, blow dry it. I never saw my actual hair texture until I reached almost 20 years old. And so I don't have it. It's just so it's mind blowing that like I don't have photos of me just in my natural state as a child. That's not the experience of all Black women or Black girls, but that was my lived experience. And I just think about that and I'm like, Raquel Saraswati or Rachel Segel, and Rachel Dolezal never endured some of those experiences. Like I lived through some really traumatic experiences as a child, and navigating this juxtaposition that I faced of, going to a school where I was one of few Black kids and then being in a neighborhood where I was one of many Black kids. Like there was so much involved in that. And so that we just, you're by pretending to be part of a historically marginalized identity, racial identity, you are just pretty much having no respect for people that really endured that lived experience. And this gets into credibility as well, right? Because these are individuals that we're talking about, individuals here whose work is within the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, and advocacy and social change and all those things. And they've been in this work speaking to generational trauma and experiences that they themselves may have experienced now that they're pretending to be these identities. But before that, like throughout childhood and things like that, they didn't endure that because their appearance did not, it wasn't there. And as much as people say, I don't want to see color, I don't see race, that good on you as an individual. Our society historically has placed hierarchy on racial identity and colorism. That is just the reality that we live in. And the sooner people just accept that, the sooner we can start to make change. But the more people deny that, the more the systems perpetuate themselves, which is such a problem. But again, going back to the credibility piece, I know I'm on a soapbox today, but again, you're hiring in these people who are sitting there telling you these stories. They're trying to, they're doing work that is for the very people that they claim to be, but they're not actually. And then when the truth comes out, which it almost always does, it discredits the work and it creates distrust for the work itself, right? Where, most of us, we look at, academic research and studies and things like that, and we believe it to be true, right? They're being created and done by and put together by people who we presumably trust their expertise. How am I supposed to trust the expertise of somebody who put on a costume, essentially, is how I see it. That's just how I see it. And when people are misrepresenting their identities, and taking on these roles, again, specifically in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space and advocacy spaces, you are taking away the very few opportunities that are already real narrow and tiny for people who actually identify and who were born into those identities. So that is also harmful and a problem in itself. The last point that I'll touch on here is the harm that comes with deception, just in general. Like, let's take a step back from this whole situation of racial identity and things like that. I don't know why, but I randomly was watching Catfish recently, and it's just such a good example of what we're talking about here, right? Where we see the story time and time again with catfish, where two people, they meet online and then one of them is pretending to be something they're not. Perhaps they are saying they're an identity just to relate to the person they're talking to. The person they're talking to is excited because they're like, oh, I finally have someone who hears me and I can tell this person anything, and they were there for me when I went through this thing. And so, yeah, they did a lot of good work. The catfish, that person did a lot of good work. But when the truth comes out, the harm, the result of that deception is, and that distrust is so real. And we as humans internalize that, and it's so hard to recover from that. It's like, how do I then trust somebody again? And do I want to live my life just being deceived? And so I just, I'm gonna link an article below, because there were a couple professors actually in Canada who have focused on Indigenous people studies, and they were just kind of calling out the problem with pretending to be a racial identity that you are not as a white person. And one of the things they really focus on is deception, right? And saying that it creates this mistrust, and it's problematic. It's really problematic, and it can bring up pain and trauma for a lot of people, who, quite frankly, we trying to move past that. We don't really want to revisit that. So I know I could go down a whole rabbit hole on the psychology of deception and all that stuff, but I just wanted to call out some of the reasons why it's harmful. And I also just wanted to clarify that that pretending to lean into, or to, I don't even know what the word is at this point. I was on a soapbox today, but pretending to be a white person, if you are or if you are a historically marginalized person or belong to a historically marginalized group identity, yes, I don't agree with it. I think it can also be harmful in a lot of ways too, but I think the impact is not as significant and not as severe as it is when a white person pretends to belong to a historically marginalized identity, simply because of the power dynamics that are at play. That is kind of the root cause, but of course it's so much deeper than that. So DEI in 5, more like DEI in 20 today. Let me know what you think in the comments. I think I'm going to start exploring concepts, ideas, topics, news, things like this more in depth. If there are specific terminologies and things like that you want me to continue to talk about in DEI and 5, please drop a comment. But thanks for listening. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and I will see you back here tomorrow. And I will try to keep it 5 minutes tomorrow, but this is such an important topic, and I just had to dive into it. So thanks again for listening. See y'all later. Bye.